be diving into hair loss. And, to start this off, I think it's important, before we talk about natural solutions, I think we really should be talking about, what can actually cause hair loss and defining different types of hair loss. The two biggest types there are that I see, let me use that red is not showing up quite as well, so let's use some different colors here. Number one, we can have what's called autoimmune hair loss. Now, autoimmune hair loss is predominantly, there are different kinds of names. It's oftentimes referred to as alopecia, and there's alopecia universalis, there's alopecia areata. Think of autoimmune hair loss as almost like a patchy development of hair loss. I've got a really good image of a person who's had autoimmune hair loss. We'll see if we can pull that up here in just a second for you. But when you're thinking of autoimmune hair loss, generally the hair loss itself, it's not hair thinning. So let's clarify. In the second type, it's thinning because the hair's not regrowing. No regrowth is different because we all have natural hair loss. Hair falls out. But if we don't have adequate regrowth, then the hair, it starts to thin, and over time it gets thinner and thinner and thinner and can create problems. So whereas alopecia hair loss of an autoimmune variety is going to be where the hair follicle itself is destroyed by your immune system, and what that leaves is it leaves a very, very smooth skin behind. So think of it as it's almost like a very, very smooth. It's usually in circular or nummular-like patches. So we get big patches of hair loss that occur as a result of a damage to the hair follicles by the immune system, and that feels almost smooth as a baby's butt. If you've ever changed a baby's diaper, baby skin's very, very soft. Well, that's what the area where autoimmune hair loss occurs. That's what that skin feels like where that hair loss occurs. So, autoimmune hair loss, thinning, or regrowth. And of course, there are a number of different things that can cause autoimmune disease. And if you followed me for any length of time, you should go back, if you haven't, and watch some of the segments I've done on the causes of autoimmune disease, because there's 4 general causes for autoimmune disease. One is infection, one is food, one is chemical exposure, and one is nutritional deficiency. So those are 4 of the main triggers for autoimmune disease or alopecia. And so as a food category, now just let me know when we've got that picture we can pull up, because I like to show that so that people can get an idea for what that actually looks like. But again, you've got different causes being food, chemicals, nutritional deficiency, and interestingly enough, nutritional deficiency fits both categories here. Nutritional deficiency fits that category as well. Nutritional deficiency can cause autoimmune disease, but it can also cause a thinning of the hair or a lack of regrowth of the hair. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. And then in addition to that, you've got microbial imbalances or infection. And so let's talk about these things and how they can contribute to hair loss. In an autoimmune way, these things can all serve as triggers for the autoimmune response. So they can cause a dysregulation in the way the immune system perceives your own tissue, and that can lead to an attack on your tissue. But one of the other things that infection can do, and this actually, infection falls in both categories as well, is it can lead to lack of regrowth, but it can also lead to autoimmune alopecia. Again, think of autoimmune alopecia as nummular, so like patches, almost circular-like patches of hair loss, whereas if you think of hair thinning, it's the hair's not growing back. Again, very important distinctions. But infection, let me spell that properly for you, infections can create this nummular loss by the inducement of autoimmunity, but can also cause a lack of hair regrowth or thinning. And one of the reasons why is the immune system needs protein to function. All of your antibodies, a lot of your immune chemicals are made from protein. And so what happens with an infection is your immune system is ramping up to try to deal with the infection. So it's producing antibodies and other chemical compounds that are protein-based to help fight that infection. And when you've got an acute infection is one thing. So like a short-term, a few days, you've got an acute cold or acute flu, it's generally gone within a couple of weeks. You're not going to see a ton of hair loss in that type of time frame as far as the thinning of the hair. But what you will see is if you've got a chronic infection and your body, like a chronic Lyme infection or chronic H. pylori infection or chronic Klebsiella or chronic yeast overgrowth, these are all things that the immune system is stealing the protein. Okay, it's sequestering the protein from the diet to build the weapons to try to win the war against the chronic infection. And it's not prioritizing hair regrowth. Remember, what is your hair? Your hair is made out of protein. It's made out of collagen protein. And so if your protein is being burned up by your immune system, your hair growth is not looked at by your body as a priority. So your body prioritizes protein going to the immune system, prioritizes it away from hair. We'll see a lot of chronically sick people, especially with chronic infection, we'll see a lot of hair thinning where they won't have the regrowth. So the no regrowth occurs as a result of chronic infection, but chronic infection can also stimulate, again, an autoimmune process. Now, one of the most common forms of autoimmune disease that causes hair loss, of course, is the family of alopecia-based hair loss diseases. But there are other autoimmune diseases that can also contribute to hair loss in different ways. This is where it kind of gets somewhat confusing. So we think about what can cause thinning of the hair or prevent the regrowth of hair, right? We know that nutritional deficiencies can. I just mentioned that we said infection can, okay? But what about disease states? One of the disease states, for example, is hypothyroidism. Now, here's why it can get confusing, because there's a caveat here. This is an autoimmune disease if it's something like Hashimoto's. So if you've been diagnosed with a Hashimoto condition, Hashimoto's thyroid, low thyroid, then this is a form of autoimmune disease. You should know that. It's not the same kind of autoimmune disease as alopecia, which will cause nummular patches of hair loss, but it is a type of autoimmune disease that will slow down the metabolism and make it hard for your hair to regrow. So your hair will more thin with this type of autoimmune disease. So although autoimmune alopecia will cause this, autoimmune other conditions, which will lead to chronic inflammation, will make it very, very hard for your hair to regrow. So keep in mind, there's an autoimmune disease that will actually attack your hair follicle, but then there's also an autoimmune disease that will make it hard for your hair to regrow. So this is why it can get confusing, and this is why a lot of people get confused. So again, we've got chronic infections causing both. We've got infection. We've got nutritional deficiencies that can lead to help contribute to autoimmune alopecia, particularly in my experience here, vitamin D is a major player in autoimmune progression. So if you haven't had your vitamin D levels checked, especially your 25-OHD, you can ask any doctor will run it or should be able to run that. It's a pretty simple test. It's not one of these more advanced types of tests that I sometimes talk about where we're looking at nutritional deficiencies in a much more advanced way. This is a simple test you can ask your doctor to run. Oftentimes, autoimmune disease is associated with vitamin D deficiency. So how do we get vitamin D? Well, you can get it through sunlight. That's absolutely the best way to get it. Sunlight without sunscreen. Remember that SPF 15 or higher blocks vitamin D production. So if you're out in the sun and you're wearing, actually SPF 8 or greater will tremendously reduce your skin's capacity to make its own vitamin D. So make sure you're out in the sun and that you're not using sunscreen, and unless you're staying out really long periods of time where you're fearing burning. But you shouldn't fear burning if you're just going out 20 or 30 minutes. You shouldn't have to slather on sunscreen every time you go outside. You should be able to get natural sunlight because that's how we make vitamin D. Now, from a food source, you can get vitamin D from mushrooms. You can get vitamin D from liver. Some people take it supplementally in vitamin D in supplemental form. Some people use cod liver oil as a source of vitamin D. So those are all different ways that you can get vitamin D. But this is a major player in autoimmune disease. So an autoimmune induction of both nummular patch-like hair loss, but also autoimmune disease induction of hair thinning. So it can go either way, and I've actually seen it in some cases go both ways, where people had alopecia of an autoimmune nature, but also had thinning of the hair. So they had like patches of hair loss in different places, but their whole head, the hair itself was thinning all the way around. So it can happen both ways.
Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.